Look at this relic heap of alien junk. Can't believe that tank commander monkey is going to scrap it into something. The group of Lurians cackled derisively at the old human tank, rusting in the scrapyard. Kevin Bailey, brow furrowed, tried to ignore the slurs as he inspected the tank's corroded treads and neglected hull. He knew the Lurians viewed him and all humans as primitives, cavemen LARPing as spacemen. But he'd show them what humans were made of soon enough. As the Lurian homeworld's twin suns beat down on the scrap heap, Kevin ran a calloused hand over the tank's flaking paint. Memories of his tour with the 4th Armored Division flooded back, before the economic collapse, before humanity became refugees and he a disgraced vet toiling in an alien junkyard. Kevin sighed as he popped the hatch, but his old friend Keed, the only Lurian who didn't sneer at him, leaned in with wide eyes. "Kevin, is this what I think it is?" Keed asked in awe, inspecting the analog controls and bulletproof viewports. "A genuine pattern of full main battle tank? From the Centauri campaign?" "Yep," Kevin grunted. "Last of its kind. Probably the only human war machine in the whole Lurian Empire." He patted the 200mm gun barrel affectionately. "And I'm going to get her running again. Remind these Lurian bastards what humans can do." Cade bit his lip. "I want to help, but if my bosses find out we're wasting time on this primitive tech, we could lose our jobs. Or worse, with tensions rising." He glanced nervously at the Lurian guards, assault blasters on their hips. Kevin gripped his friend's shoulder. "Cade, if war does break out, this tank might be the only thing standing between the human ghettos and total annihilation." His eyes flashed with determination. "We'll restore her in secret if we have to, because when the Lurians see her rampage across the battlefield, they won't be laughing anymore, I promise you that." For weeks, Kevin and Keed toiled away on the tank in secret, spending every spare moment in the scrapyard. Kevin's hands were constantly stained with grease as he worked to repair the treads and overhaul the engine. Meanwhile, Keed used his knowledge of Lurian tech to upgrade the targeting systems and patch the holes in the armor. But finding the right parts was a constant struggle. The Pattern 4 used specialized components that were scarce even when it was built, let alone decades later. Kevin and Keid had to get creative, scavenging parts from other vehicles and repurposing Lurian tech. Once they spent an entire night haggling with a shady dealer for a single high-powered capacitor. As the days turned into weeks, the stress began to take its toll. Kevin snapped at Keed over a minor wiring issue, and Keed nearly quit in frustration. But they always managed to patch things up, bonding over their shared love of machines and their determination to prove the Lurians wrong about humans. Then disaster struck. Cade's family discovered what he'd been up to. His father, a high-ranking Lurian official, was furious. "How you're throwing away your future, and for what? To help this human scum?" he bellowed, his face turning a deep shade of purple. "If you don't stop this nonsense immediately, you're no longer my son." Keed was torn. He knew his family would never understand his friendship with Kevin or his belief in the human cause. But could he really turn his back on everything he'd ever known? In the end, loyalty won out. Keed returned to the scrapyard, his eyes red from crying but his voice steady. "I'm with you, Kevin," he said simply, "no matter what." But their troubles were far from over. General Jadok, the most ruthless commander in the Lurian military, had gotten wind of their project. He viewed the idea of humans possessing advanced weaponry as an unacceptable threat to Lurian supremacy. Jadok's troops raided the scrapyard in the dead of night, plasma rifles at the ready. Kevin and Keed barely had time to scramble into the tank before the shooting started. "Hold on," Kevin yelled, slamming the hatch shut and powering up the engines. The tank roared to life, its newly restored treads churning up clouds of dust as it surged forward. Plasma bolts pinged off the armor as the Lurians opened fire, but the tank's self-healing composite absorbed the damage. Kevin grinned fiercely as he returned fire with the 200mm cannon, blasting a Lurian APC to smithereens. "Cloak engaged," Keed reported from the gunner's seat, and the tank shimmered and vanished from view. The Lurians gaped in disbelief as it rampaged through their ranks, seemingly invulnerable and invisible. Within minutes, the scrapyard was littered with burning Lurian vehicles and shell-shocked soldiers. Kevin whooped in triumph as he piloted the tank out of the compound and into the Lurian desert, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. News of the humans' improbable victory spread like wildfire through the ghettos and shanty towns. For the first time in years, the downtrodden refugees dared to hope. If a single human in a refurbished tank could defeat Jardok's troops, maybe they weren't so helpless after all. In a secret bunker deep beneath the desert sands, a hooded figure smiled as it watched footage of the tank's rampage. The leader of the resistance had been waiting for an opportunity like this for years. The figure turned to its lieutenants, its eyes gleaming beneath the hood. "Send word to all cells, the time has come. We must contact this tank commander and his Lurian ally. With their help, we will finally drive these invaders from our world and reclaim our destiny." The resistance fighters nodded grimly, already beginning to plot. With General Jardok's forces hunting them across the Lurian wastelands, Kevin and Cade knew they needed help. Through whispered rumors and furtive contacts, they finally tracked down the human resistance movement. At a clandestine meeting in the ruins of an abandoned factory, they were introduced to Commander Alara Novak. Her piercing green eyes seemed to bore into Kevin's soul as she sized him up. "So you're the tank commander who humiliated Jardok," she said, her voice rich with amusement. "I have to admit I'm impressed. That rusting heap of yours is already becoming a symbol of hope for our people." Kevin shrugged, trying to play it cool. "It's not finished yet. We need a safe place to complete the repairs and upgrades." Alara smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of her lips. "I think we can arrange that. We have a hidden base in the Karos Mountains. It's well defended and fully equipped. You can work on your tank there without fear of discovery." Teixeid shifted nervously. "And what do you want in return?" "Two things," Alara replied, holding up her fingers. "First, we need that tank operational as soon as possible. It could be a game-changer in our fight against the Lurians." Kevin nodded. "And the second?" "I want you to train some of my people in armored warfare. We have a few captured Lurian vehicles, but no one knows how to use them effectively. With your expertise, we could turn them into a real fighting force." Kevin and Keed exchanged a glance. It was a risk exposing themselves to a group of strangers, but what choice did they have? "We're in," Kevin said. The rebel base was everything Alara had promised and more. Tucked away in a hidden valley, it was a sprawling complex of hangars, barracks, and training grounds. Kevin and Kaid were given a private workshop, stocked with every tool and part they could possibly need. As they worked to finish the tank, Kevin also began training a select group of rebels in the art of mechanized combat. He found them to be quick learners, eager to absorb his knowledge. He also found himself drawn to Alara. In quiet moments between training sessions, they would talk about their pasts, their dreams for the future. She told him about her childhood in the ghettos, how she had lost her family to Lurian brutality. He spoke of his time in the military, the camaraderie and sense of purpose he had felt. One night, as they shared a bottle of Lurian whiskey under the stars, Alara leaned in close. "You know, Kevin, when I first heard about you, I thought you were just another crazy human with a death wish. But now—" her hand brushed his cheek. "Now I see that you're fighting for something greater, just like me." Kevin swallowed hard, his heart pounding. He knew that falling for Alara was a bad idea. They were in the middle of a war, after all. But he couldn't deny the connection between them, the sense that they understood each other in a way no one else could. Their moment was interrupted by a commotion at the base's entrance. Kevin and Alara rushed over to see Keed, arguing with a tall, slender Lurian woman. "Lyra," Keed gasped, "what are you doing here?" The woman fixed him with a cold stare. "I'm here to bring you home, brother. Father is furious. He's threatened to disown you if you don't return immediately." Keed shook his head. "I can't do that, Lyra. They're my friends. I believe in what they're fighting for." Lyra snorted in disgust. Friends with these primitives, have you lost your mind? Alara stepped forward, her hand on her blaster. Watch your tongue, Lurian, you're in our territory now. Lyra ignored her, focusing on Cade. Come home, brother, before it's too late. Cade hesitated, torn between his loyalty to his family and his newfound cause. But before he could respond, an alarm blared through the base. Attention all personnel, a voice crackled over the loudspeakers. We have a security breach in the command center. Repeat, security breach in the command center. Alara cursed under her breath. Zadok must have tracked us somehow. We need to evacuate now. But as they raced towards the command center, they found a scene of chaos. Rebel technicians lay unconscious at their stations, and the main view screen displayed a chilling sight. A massive Lurian fleet poised to attack. By the gods, Lyra breathed, her eyes wide with horror. They're going to wipe us out. Kevin felt a sudden surge of determination. He turned to Alara, his jaw set. Get everyone to the transports. I'll hold them off with the tank. Alara shook her head. Kevin, no, it's suicide. He gripped her shoulders, his gaze intense. It's the only way. If we don't buy you some time, none of us will make it out alive. Tears glistened in Alara's eyes, but she nodded. All right, but you better come back to me, tank boy. That's an order. Kevin grinned, stealing a quick kiss. Yes, ma'am. As the rebels scrambled to evacuate, Kevin sprinted towards the hangar where the tank was waiting. Cade fell into step beside him, his face grim. I'm coming with you, he said. Kevin shook his head. Cade, no, you need to get your sister to safety. But Cade was adamant. Lyra can take care of herself, and besides, you need a gunner. Kevin clapped his friend on the shoulder, a lump in his throat. All right then, let's give these Lurian bastards hell. They clambered into the tank, powering up the engines and charging out of the hangar. In the distance, they could see the Lurian fleet descending through the atmosphere, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. Kevin gritted his teeth, aiming the cannon at the lead ship. This is for Earth, you sons of bitches. As plasma bolts sizzled past the tank's hull, Kevin gripped the controls, his hands slick with sweat. The cloaking device fizzled and died, rendering them visible to the enemy forces that swarmed around them like angry hornets. Curheed status report, Kevin barked, swerving hard to evade a barrage of anti-armor rounds that pocked the Earth where they'd been moments before. Cade, his face pale and drawn, tapped frantically at the flickering displays. Cloak's down and the self-repair systems are struggling to keep up. We've got wounded in the convoy, too. It's bad, Kevin. Kevin swore under his breath. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Lurian mole had leaked their plan, and now they were paying the price. Alara's voice crackled over the comm, strained but determined. Kevin, we can't take much more of this. We need to get the wounded out of here. Kevin hesitated, torn between his duty to the mission and his loyalty to his friends. But before he could respond, Cade spoke up. Kevin, you have to keep going. You and Alara are the only ones who can complete the mission now. Cade's voice was laced with pain, but his eyes shone with resolve. I can't leave you behind, Kevin argued, even as he dodged another volley of enemy fire. We stick together no matter what. Cade shook his head. The mission is more important. If we don't take out that command center, all of this will have been for nothing. He gripped Kevin's shoulder, his gaze intense. I'll get the wounded to safety. You finish this, Kevin, for all of us. Kevin's jaw clenched, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision. But he knew Cade was right. With a curt nod, he turned back to the controls. Alara, it's just you and me now, he said over the comm. We're going to punch through their lines and give them hell. I'm with you, Kevin, Alara replied, her voice filled with grim determination. Let's show these Lurian bastards what humans are made of. Kevin gunned the engine, the tank surging forward like an unleashed beast. The remaining rebel fighters rallied around them, their weapons blazing as they charged headlong into the enemy ranks. Zadok's troops, caught off guard by the sudden ferocity of the assault, faltered. Kevin and Alara pressed their advantage, the tank's cannon roaring as it blasted a path through the Lurian lines. But even as they advanced, Kevin's heart ached for those left behind. Keed, Lyra, the wounded rebels, their fates were in the hands of chance now. All he could do was honor their sacrifice and complete the mission. With a roar of defiance, Kevin aimed the tank towards the looming spires of the Lurian capital. One way or another, this war would end today. Plasma bolts sizzled past the tank's battered hull as Kevin and Alara pushed deeper into the Lurian capital. Zadok's forces swarmed around them, their weapons pounding relentlessly against the failing self-healing armor. Inside the cockpit, warning lights flashed red and alarms blared. "We're running out of options here, Alara," Kevin yelled over the din of battle. "The main cannon's almost out of ammo, and the armor can't take much more of this." Alara, her face streaked with sweat and grime, shook her head. "We can't give up now, Kevin. Not when we're so close." Kevin's eyes darted over the controls, searching for a solution. Then he saw it, the prototype plasma cannon, its sleek barrel gleaming with deadly promise. "The plasma cannon," he said, his voice tight with tension. "It's our only chance." Alara's eyes widened. "Kevin, no, we haven't tested it yet. If it overloads the reactor—" "We don't have a choice," Kevin snapped. "It's this or we fail." Alara hesitated for a moment, then nodded grimly. "All right, I'll regulate the reactor. You fire the cannon." Kevin's fingers flew over the controls, priming the cannon. The tank shuddered as energy surged through its systems, the reactor whining with the strain. "Steady," Alara warned, her eyes glued to the readouts. "Just a little more." With a roar of unleashed power, the plasma cannon fired. A blinding beam of pure energy lanced out from the tank's barrel, slamming into the Lurian command center with the force of a small sun. The building exploded in a maelstrom of fire and rubble, the shockwave rippling out through the city like a tidal wave. Inside the tank, alarms shrieked as the reactor temperature spiked dangerously. Alara gritted her teeth, her hands flying over the controls as she fought to keep the reactor stable. Come on," she muttered, sweat pouring down her face. For a moment, it seemed like the reactor would hold. But then, with a sickening lurch, the tank systems went haywire. Sparks flew from the control panels, and smoke began to fill the cockpit. "We've got to get out of here," Kevin yelled, grabbing Alara's arm. They stumbled from the smoking wreckage of the tank, coughing and gasping for air. Around them, the Lurian capital lay in ruins, the once mighty command center reduced to a pile of smoldering rubble. But even as they staggered to their feet, a cheer went up from the streets. Human and alien rebels poured into the square, their weapons raised in triumph. They had seen the tank's final desperate attack, and it had given them the courage to rise up against their Lurian oppressors. Kevin and Alara stood there, battered and exhausted but alive, as the rebels surged around them. For a moment they allowed themselves to savor the sweet taste of victory. But then a rebel came running up to them, his face pale with fear. "Commander Novak, we just received word from our scouts. Kaid and the wounded, they've been captured by Zadok's forces." Kevin and Alara exchanged a look of horror, their triumph turning to ashes in their mouths. After all they had sacrificed, all they had fought for, their friends were now in the hands of the enemy. Kevin and Alara wasted no time. They gathered the rebel leaders, poring over stolen blueprints of the Lurian prison camp, where Kaid and the others were being held. The compound was a fortress of concrete and plasma shields, bristling with gun turrets and patrolled by elite guards. A frontal assault would be suicide. "There's no way in," Alara said, shaking her head. "Unless—" She turned to Lyra, who had been quietly studying the blueprints. "Can you hack their security systems?" Lyra's fingers flew over the keyboard, lines of code scrolling across the screen. "I can disable the perimeter defenses," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But only for a short window. You'll need to move fast." Kevin nodded grimly. "We'll need a distraction." He turned to the rebel commanders. "Assemble a strike team. We're going to hit them hard and fast, right at their front door." As the rebels prepared for battle, Kevin loaded the last of the tank's ammunition. The plasma cannon was drained, but the 200mm gun still had a few rounds left. It would have to be enough. At dawn, the rebel forces moved into position. Lyra's fingers danced across the keyboard, and with a final keystroke, the prison camp's defenses went dark. "Go!" Kevin yelled, gunning the tank's engines. The strike team surged forward, rebel soldiers pouring through the gaps in the force field. Alarms blared as the Lurians scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The tank's 200mm cannon roared, blasting a hole through the prison walls. Kevin leapt from the tank, his assault rifle blazing as he charged into the breach. Alara was right behind him, her face a mask of determination. Together, they fought their way through the corridors, rebels and Lurians locked in fierce close-quarters combat. They found Keed and the others in a high-security cell block, battered but alive. Kevin tossed Keed a rifle, grinning fiercely. "Thought you could use a hand." But as they fought their way back to the breach, a massive figure blocked their path. It was Zadok, his eyes burning with hatred. "You think you've won, human?" he snarled, drawing a plasma sword. "I'll crush you like the insect you are." Kevin stepped forward, his jaw set. "Alara, get the others out of here. I'll handle this." Zadok lunged, his blade sizzling through the air. Kevin ducked and rolled, coming up firing, but Zadok was too fast, his sword a blur as he deflected the bullets. They fought hand to hand, trading blows in a deadly dance. Zadok was stronger, faster, his every move honed by a lifetime of combat. But Kevin fought with the ferocity of a man with nothing left to lose. Blow after blow rained down until both men were bruised and bloody. But Kevin's determination never wavered. With a final, desperate effort, he seized Zadok's sword arm and twisted, the bones snapping like twigs. Zadok howled in agony, dropping to his knees. Kevin stood over him, rifle leveled at his head. For a moment he was tempted to pull the trigger, to end the monster who had caused so much suffering. But then he heard Alara's voice calling out to him, "Kevin, we have to go." Kevin lowered his rifle, turning his back on the defeated Lurian. "This isn't over," he said, his voice cold, "but today humanity wins." As the rebels fled the prison camp, Lyra's voice crackled over the comms. "I'm in their network," she said, her tone triumphant, "broadcasting on all frequencies." And across the planet, screens flickered to life, displaying images of Kevin and the rebels' victory. In the ghettos and shanty towns, in the factories and fields, humans and aliens alike looked up in wonder as a new message of hope filled the airwaves. The spark had been lit, and the fires of rebellion were spreading like wildfire. As the fires of rebellion raged across the Lurian homeworld, Kevin and his team became the beating heart of the resistance. In every ghetto and shantytown, oppressed humans and aliens whispered their names with reverence, drawing strength from their tales of courage and defiance. The battered tank, once a symbol of human ingenuity, now served as a mobile command center for the rebel forces. Kevin and Alara huddled over its flickering displays, coordinating lightning strikes against Lurian supply depots and communication hubs. Lyra's fingers danced across the keyboard, hacking into enemy networks and sowing chaos behind the lines. But even as the rebels scored victory after victory, a new threat loomed on the horizon. Vast Lurian warships darkened the skies, disgorging legions of battle-hardened troops onto the planet's surface. At their head strode Commander Vaitra, Zadok's ruthless second-in-command. Vaitra was a master strategist, cold and calculating where Zadok had been brutish and impulsive. She studied the rebels' tactics, probing for weaknesses, and then struck with surgical precision. In a series of devastating ambushes, her forces crippled the rebel supply lines and isolated their strongholds. The tank, once the rebels' greatest asset, became a liability. Vaitra's spies had learned of its cloaking device and self-healing armor, and she equipped her troops with specialized scanners and armor-piercing rounds. In a brutal firefight on the outskirts of the capital, the tank's defenses finally failed, its armor crumpling under a barrage of plasma fire. "We have to abandon the tank," Alara yelled over the screech of alarms. "It's a death trap now." Kevin, his face streaked with sweat and grime, nodded grimly. He gunned the engines, plowing through the Lurian lines as the rebels leapt from the stricken vehicle. They fled into the wilderness, the sound of Vytra's hunters close behind. For days, they pressed on through the harsh Lurian landscape, scavenging for food and water, huddling together for warmth in the frigid nights. But as the days turned into weeks, hope began to wane. The rebels' injuries festered, and their supplies dwindled to nothing. Some spoke of surrender, of begging for mercy from their Lurian overlords. But then, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, a strange figure appeared on a distant ridge. It was a Lurian, but unlike any they had ever seen, draped in tattered robes, with a staff of gnarled wood in one hand. The Lurian raised its staff in greeting, and then vanished into the gathering dusk. Intrigued, Kevin and Alara led a small party in pursuit of the mysterious stranger. They followed the Lurian's tracks through winding canyons and over rocky escarpments, until at last they emerged into a hidden valley, where a small village nestled among the cliffs. The villagers were Lurian nomads, their skin bronzed by the sun, their eyes filled with the wisdom of the ages. They welcomed the rebels into their midst, sharing what little food and water they had. Around the flickering campfire, the nomads told tales of their people's long struggle against the ruling class, of generations spent fighting and dying in the name of freedom. The nomads' leader, a wizened old shaman named Krull, took a special interest in Kevin. He saw in the human warrior a kindred spirit, a fellow rebel against tyranny. In the days that followed, Krull took Kevin aside, teaching him the secrets of the nomads' ancient guerrilla tactics, how to blend into the landscape, how to strike and fade like the wind, how to turn an enemy's strength against them. Under Krull's tutelage, Kevin and the other rebels began to see the Lurian wilderness not as a hostile expanse, but as an ally in their fight. They learned to navigate by the stars, to find water in the driest deserts, to craft weapons from the bones of fallen beasts, and slowly, the spark of hope began to rekindle in their hearts. They knew that Vytra and her forces were still out there, scouring the wastelands for any sign of the rebels, but now, armed with the wisdom of the nomads, they were ready to face her once again. The fight for the Lurian homeworld was far from over, but with Kevin and his team leading the charge, the rebels knew that victory was within reach. The Lurian tyrants would learn to fear the ghosts of the desert, the phantom warriors who struck without warning and vanished into the sands. The rebellion would rise again, stronger and more determined than ever before. In the days that followed, Kevin and the rebels immersed themselves in the ways of the nomads. Krull led them deep into the Lurian wilds, teaching them to read the land like a book. They learned to track Vytra's patrols by the faintest signs, a broken twig here, a displaced stone there. They learned to move with the wind, to become one with the shadows. Krull shared with Kevin the ancient techniques of camouflage and concealment, passed down through generations of nomad warriors. He taught him to craft blinds from the gnarled branches of the thorny Charch Kresh bush, to paint his skin with the mottled patterns of the desert stones. Under the shaman's guidance, Kevin and the rebels became ghosts in the wilderness, striking Vytra's forces with impunity before fading back into the landscape. In the long nights around the campfire, Krull regaled Kevin with tales of the nomads' history, of their centuries-long struggle against Lurian oppression. He spoke of mighty heroes and great battles, of sacrifices made and victories won, but always he returned to the prophecy, the legend of a warrior from beyond the stars who would unite the peoples of the Lurian homeworld and lead them to freedom. "Many among my people believe that you are this warrior, Kevin," Krull said one night, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "They see in you the fulfillment of an ancient promise." Kevin shifted uncomfortably, the weight of expectation heavy on his shoulders. "I'm no hero, Krull, I'm just a soldier, trying to do what's right." Krull smiled, his weathered face creasing with wisdom. "And that, my friend, is exactly what makes a true hero." As Kevin and the nomads waged their guerrilla war against Vytra's forces, Cade and Lyra worked tirelessly to bring the tank back to life. With the help of a team of rebel engineers, they cannibalized parts from captured Lurian vehicles, jerry-rigging repairs and upgrades with a combination of human ingenuity and Lurian tech. But it was Lyra who made the breakthrough discovery. As she delved into the tank's computer systems, she found a hidden protocol buried deep within the code. It was a neural interface designed to allow the tank to connect with and control other machines. "This changes everything," Lyra breathed, her eyes wide with excitement. "With this, we could turn the Lurians' own defenses against them, hijack their drones, their turrets, their whole damn network." Cade grinned, catching on to her plan. "We could sow chaos behind their lines, hit them where they least expect it." As the final confrontation with Vatra's forces loomed on the horizon, Kevin found himself grappling with his growing role as a leader and symbol of the resistance. The nomads looked to him for guidance, for inspiration. And so did Alara, her eyes shining with a fierce pride and an unspoken longing. In the quiet moments between battles and planning sessions, Kevin and Alara would steal away together, finding solace in each other's presence. They spoke of their hopes and fears, their dreams for a future free from Lurian tyranny. But always, the spectre of the coming battle hung over them, a reminder that their love was a fragile thing in a time of war. One night, as they lay in each other's arms beneath the stars, Alara turned to Kevin, her voice soft and heavy with emotion. "Promise me something, Kevin. Promise me that no matter what happens, you'll never give up on our people, on our dream." Kevin pulled her close, his heart aching with the weight of his own feelings. "I promise, Alara. I'll fight for you, for all of us, until my last breath." They held each other then, two warriors bound by a love that burned brighter than the fires of war. And in that moment, Kevin knew that he would face the coming storm with Alara by his side, no matter the cost. As the sun rose over the Lurian wastes, painting the sands in shades of blood and fire, Kevin and his army of rebels and nomads prepared to meet Vatra's forces in a final, decisive battle. The tank, now a gleaming beacon of hope and retribution, stood ready to lead the charge, its newly installed neural interface thrumming with power. Kevin climbed into the cockpit, his eyes meeting Alara's in a moment of silent understanding. Cade and Lyra took their places at the controls, their fingers poised over the keys that would unleash the tank's full potential. And Krull, his staff held high, rallied the nomads with a fierce battle cry, his voice ringing out across the desert like a clarion call to war. The ground trembled with the approach of Vatra's army, a vast host of Lurian soldiers and war machines, their weapons glinting in the harsh light of the Lurian suns. But Kevin and his rebels met them head-on, the tank surging forward like a vengeful god of metal and fire. Lyra's fingers danced across the controls, and suddenly the Lurian machines began to turn on their masters, their weapons swiveling to target the very soldiers they were meant to protect. Drones fell from the sky like burning stars, crashing into the ranks of the Lurian infantry. Automated turrets swung wildly, raking the battlefield with friendly fire. In the chaos, Kevin and Alara led the charge, the rebels and nomads surging forward in a tide of righteous fury. Plasma bolts and bullets filled the air, the screams of the dying mingling with the war cries of the living, and at the heart of it all, the tank rampaged through the Lurian lines, its armor absorbing the brunt of the enemy fire, its weapons laying waste to all in its path. But Vatra was not so easily defeated. With a roar of rage, she rallied her troops, leading a desperate counterattack against the rebel flank. Her elite guard, armed with heavy plasma cannons, rained down a withering barrage on the tank, pushing it back step by step. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared and sparks flew as the tank systems began to fail under the onslaught. Kevin gritted his teeth, his hands white-knuckled on the controls as he fought to keep the machine moving forward. Beside him, Alara poured fire into the advancing Lurians, her face a mask of grim determination. Then, in a moment of terrible clarity, Kevin saw Vatra herself, charging towards the tank with a plasma lance in hand. Her eyes burned with a hatred that bordered on madness, and Kevin knew that she would not stop until the tank, and all who stood with it, were nothing but ashes and dust. With a roar that shook the battlefield, the tank surged forward, plasma cannons blazing. Kevin gritted his teeth as he gunned the engines, the treads churning up clouds of dust and debris. All around him, the rebel forces clashed with the Lurian defenders in a brutal, no-holds-barred melee. But even as the rebels fought with desperate courage, the tide began to turn. Keed and Lyra's plan unfolded like a deadly flower, the tank's neural interface worming its way into the Lurians' defense grid. One by one, the automated turrets and drones that had been raining death on the rebels suddenly swiveled, their weapons now trained on their former masters. The Lurians, caught off guard by this sudden betrayal, faltered. Some threw down their weapons in surrender, while others fled in panic. For a moment, it seemed as though victory was within reach. But then, with a deafening roar, the ground beneath the capital split open. From the gaping maw rose a monstrous construct of metal and plasma, a war platform, the likes of which Kevin had never seen. It towered over the battlefield, its armored hide bristling with cannon emplacements and missile batteries. At its helm stood Vitra, her face twisted in a snarl of rage. She leveled a finger at the rebel forces, her voice booming from the platform's loudspeakers. "Fools, you think you can defeat me with your stolen toys? Witness the true power of the Lurian Empire." With a deafening whine, the platform's main cannon began to charge, a swirling vortex of plasma building at its tip. Kevin felt his blood run cold as he realized the cannon's target, the rebel forces, caught in the open with no cover. There was no time to think, only to act. Kevin wrenched the tank's controls, sending it hurtling towards the platform. Plasma bolts pinged off the armor as Vatra's gunners tried to swat him away, but he didn't flinch. "Kevin, what are you doing?" Alara's voice crackled over the comm, laced with fear. "The only thing I can do," Kevin replied, his voice eerily calm. "I'm going to take that thing down from the inside." "So you can't," Kaid protested. "It's suicide." "Someone has to do it," Kevin said softly, "and I'm the only one who knows how." There was a moment of silence, broken only by the screech of tortured metal as Kevin pushed the tank to its limits. Then Alara spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "Kevin, I know," Kevin whispered. "Me too." With a final burst of speed, the tank slammed into the side of the platform, its armor crumpling like tin foil. Kevin felt a white-hot lance of pain as shrapnel tore through his body, but he ignored it. His hands flew over the controls, the neural interface glowing as he poured his consciousness into the platform's systems. It was like diving into a raging river of data, a maelstrom of code and algorithms. Kevin could feel the platform's defenses fighting him, trying to force him out, but he pushed on, his mind racing as he sought the weak points, the chinks in the armor. And then, just as his strength was about to give out, he found it. With a mental twist, he sent a surge of energy through the platform's reactor core, overloading its failsafes. The platform shuddered, smoke pouring from its joints as secondary explosions rippled across its hull. In the cockpit, Vitra screamed in rage and disbelief as her screens went dark, her controls dead in her hands. She pounded uselessly at the console, cursing Kevin's name with every breath. But Kevin wasn't finished. With a final, desperate effort, he severed the platform's connection to its reactor, sending the massive construct crashing to the ground in a heap of twisted metal. The impact shook the earth, sending friend and foe alike sprawling. And in the heart of the wreckage, Kevin lay broken and bleeding, his vision fading to black as the sounds of battle receded into the distance. He had done it. He had given the rebels their chance. Now it was up to them to finish what he had started. As the darkness closed in, Kevin's thoughts turned to Alara, to the promise he had made her. He had told her he would come back to her no matter what. But some promises, he knew, were meant to be broken. With a final shuddering breath, Kevin closed his eyes and let the void take him. He had given everything he had, and more. He could only hope that it had been enough. The battle raged on, the rebels surging forward with renewed fury as they saw the platform fall. They swarmed over the Lurian lines like a tidal wave, their weapons flashing in the smoke-filled air. Alara fought like a woman possessed, her plasma rifle spitting death with every trigger pull. But even as the rebels pressed their advantage, a new sound filled the air. The whine of engines, the roar of thrusters. Alara looked up, her heart sinking as she saw the shapes descending from the sky. Lurian reinforcements, hundreds of them, their dropships disgorging fresh troops onto the battlefield. They hit the rebel lines like a hammer, their weapons cutting through flesh and bone like a scythe through wheat. Alara felt despair rising in her throat as she saw her friends, her comrades, falling all around her. They had come so close, had sacrificed so much. And now, at the very cusp of victory, it was all slipping away. She reached for her comm, her fingers trembling as she keyed in Kevin's frequency. Static filled her ears, a hiss of white noise that seemed to mock her hope. "Kevin?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Kevin, can you hear me?" But there was no answer, only the crackle of dead air. Alara felt something inside her shatter, a cold, yawning void opening in her chest. She looked out over the battlefield, at the smoke and the fire and the bodies, and she knew that it was over. The Lurians had won, the rebellion was finished, and Kevin, her love, her partner, her soulmate, was gone. Kevin's vision blurred as he poured the last of his strength into the neural interface, his fingers flying across the controls. The tank shuddered around him, sparks erupting from overloaded circuits. Acrid smoke filled the cockpit, searing his lungs. But he couldn't stop now, not with so much at stake. The platform's defenses fought him at every turn, layers of encryption and firewalls standing between him and his goal. Sweat poured down his face, mingling with blood from a gash on his forehead. His whole body screamed in agony, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing on the task at hand. The tank's systems were failing, the self-healing armor crumbling under the onslaught of enemy fire. Warning lights flashed red, alarms blaring in his ears. He could feel the heat from the overloading interface, the metal searing his skin. But he was close now, so close. With a final, desperate effort, he breached the platform's last firewall, his mind merging with the alien code. For a moment, he saw through the machine's eyes, felt its power coursing through his veins. And then, with a thought, he triggered the self-destruct sequence. The explosion was cataclysmic, a blinding flash of light and heat that consumed the platform in an instant. The shockwave rippled outward, slamming into the Lurian ranks with the force of 1,000 suns. Soldiers were hurled through the air like ragdolls, their weapons and armor disintegrating in the inferno. In the heart of the maelstrom, the tank shuddered and groaned, its hull buckling under the strain. Kevin felt the world spinning around him, his consciousness fading in and out. But through the haze of pain and confusion, he heard the sound of distant cheers, saw the rebel forces surging forward, their weapons blazing. They were breaking through the enemy lines, storming the capital with renewed fury. It was the last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him. Alara, Keed, and Lyra raced across the battlefield, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had seen the explosion from afar, felt the earth tremble beneath their feet. They knew, with a sickening certainty, what it meant. They found the tank amid the smoking ruins of the platform, its once mighty hull reduced to a twisted wreck. The self-healing armor hung in tatters, the neural interface sparking and sputtering. And there, slumped over the controls, was Kevin. They pulled him from the wreckage, their hands shaking as they laid him on the ground. His body was broken and burned, his face almost unrecognizable beneath the blood and soot. But he was still breathing, still clinging to life with the same stubborn determination that had carried him this far. Krull and the other nomads gathered around, their faces etched with sorrow and reverence. They had seen the sacrifice Kevin had made, the price he had paid for their freedom. Alara knelt beside him, her tears falling on his shattered armor. She took his hand in hers, feeling the faint pulse beneath his skin. "Kevin," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please don't leave me." His eyes fluttered open, meeting hers with a look of pure love and exhaustion. He tried to speak, but the words came out as a ragged whisper. "It was worth it," he breathed, his hand tightening around hers. "All of it." And then his eyes closed, his body going slack in her arms. Alara let out a cry of anguish, burying her face in his chest. But even as she wept, she felt something strange happening. Kevin's body began to glow, a soft light emanating from his skin. It grew brighter and brighter until it was almost blinding, and then, in a flash of radiance, he vanished, his form dissolving into a cloud of shimmering stardust. Alara stared in disbelief, her tears mingling with the glowing motes that drifted on the breeze. She knew somehow that this was the ancient technology that had sustained him, the power that had brought him to this world. And now it had taken him back. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.